In the tradition of Malcolm X, peace be unto you. I think that Black History Month should not be only about remembering our past experiences in the United States. Rather, I think Black History Month should include time for us to model our future. Time to evaluate and to explain historical patterns, which will enable us to make reliable models about the direction in which we as a people are moving in the United States. The question I pose is a very general one. What will be in the future for us? What will be in the future grows out of what has been in the past and what is in this moment. I'm going to talk to you about what I think is an important outgrowth of our past experience in the United States. It has to do with our collective vitality. And I mean this in the health sense, as in your vital organs. In this segment, my focus will be on our total fertility rate and our life expectancy rate. The Center for Disease Control reported just recently that life expectancy for African Americans, descendants of slavery, has dropped 2.7 years between January and June of 2020. Let me repeat that. Between January and June of 2020, that's in 6 months. And that, of course, is due to the coronavirus death rate in the African American community. Now, no doubt it will be higher when we get the CDC reports from July through December of 2020. So fasten your seatbelts. What that means is that our quality of life or our life chances are on decline in the United States. But just in one moment, let me say that is true for African people all over the world living under the domination of white supremacy. Now, that decrease in life expectancy is correlated with a decrease in the total fertility rate of African American descendants of slavery, too. Our vital signs, like our pulse, our collective pulse, as a people, in the loosest sense of that term, are growing weaker and weaker year by year. And there are definite reasons for that. First, we haven't been having as many babies as in past generations of African Americans, and that's quite obvious. I mean, we can all see that. In other words, as discussed in the biological sciences, our population is experiencing a pattern of population decay. There is no nice way to cosmeticize that fact. Presently, the total fertility rate for descendants of slaves in the United States is 1.7 babies born per female between 15 and 45 years of age. What that means is that the African American population in the United States is below the fertility rate necessary to replace or maintain the present population so that it remains constant over time. Think of a water barrel with a faucet and a hole in the bottom to release water at a constant rate. In order to keep the water level constant, you have to have enough water to continually pour into it as water leaks out of it. Think of your sink in the kitchen. Think of your bathtub. The inflow has to be equal to the outflow in order to maintain the water level at a constant place in the barrel or tub or sink. The replacement fertility rate is 2.2 babies, some say 2.1, 2.2 babies born per female between 15 and 45 years of age. In other words, each year the number of African Americans in the United States will decrease by a constant percent if that total fertility rate remains at 1.7 or dips lower. There is nothing that can be done to offset that but to increase the total fertility rate to 2.2 and above. Think of it this way. If you have $100 in a bank account and after 1 year, 10% of that $100 is subtracted from it as negative interest, then it will leave you about $90. Then another 10% from it in a year, leaving you $81. And then another 10% is subtracted from it again, leaving you about $72.90 and so forth. You can see that without making a deposit of 10% into your account balance every year, you will have fewer and fewer dollars until over time you reach zero. It's inevitable. It's a mathematical certainty. If the negative interest remains 10% or increases, you will go broke. Population decay follows that same mathematical model. If we do not reproduce enough babies to replace the parents that sired them, then the population inevitably reduces over time to zero. And that, my dear people, is where we are headed. That is where we're at. But there's more. There are other social indicators besides the total fertility rate. See, the problem is complex. We have a lot on our plate. There is the COVID-19 epidemic and its high African American mortality rate at about 80,000 at this time, a rate that is 3 times that for white Americans. There is the decline in life expectancy at birth, which has dropped 2.7 years between January and June of 2020, according to the CDC. In other words, 2.7 years have been shaved off the life expectancy of babies born today because of the increased death rate. The marriage rate is another strong indicator of what we can estimate the birth rate to be in the future, and thus the total fertility rate. Thus, if fewer African Americans form stable families, then logically we should expect that the birth rate will decline, and of course, with it, the total fertility rate will go even further down below 1.7. Now, for comparison's sake, in 1945, 65% of all African American adults were married. The age at first marriage remained fairly constant through the 40s, the 50s, and the 60s at about 20 to 22 years of age. This year, 2021, the average age of first marriage for African American females is 30 years of age, while the overall marriage rate hovers at about 23% of all African American adults. That is to say, of all African American adults in the United States, 23% are married. Now compare that 23% to the 65% who were married in 1940. Clearly, that indicates a huge drop and a definite change in our perception of the value of marriage and what family historically was defined to be. These models are important. Now, some people may step back and say, well, that was because, culture was traditional and people had a different set of values. African Americans, I might remind you, were poor when they left the plantations or when they were sharecroppers, and they had nothing, but they had a value that had been fostered for family. They made families. Now, I'm not saying everybody made a family, but I told you that in 1940, 65% of African American adults were married. Mathematically, we can forecast what the marriage rate will be in 2035 to 2050. For instance, in 2025, given the present rate of decline, it will be approximately 17%. And by 2050, the marriage rate will be approximately 14%. Now, at that time, I've concluded we can say with fair certainty that marriage amongst African Americans in the United States will be a thing of the past. And along with that, a continually declining birth rate, lower life expectancy, and an increasing death rate. Now, there's a long road to 2050. But given the present conditions, given the present set of problems that we face, don't expect a miracle. Recently, this month, February, during Black History Month, again this month, I heard a talk by a professor of political science at the University of San Francisco. His name is James Taylor. He was speaking on a popular radio station in D.C., WOL's Carl Nelson show. And he said on that show that by 2050, there will be 70 million African Americans in the United States, and all we have to do is move to the South and take over, the Southern states politically. It was purely rhetorical. It was pure rhetoric. Professor Taylor did not cite any sources for that figure, nor did he provide a statistical analysis or model of his own. He was misrepresenting current facts. There will not be 70 million African Americans in the United States in 2050, and there is no possible way that our population will grow given the 1.7 total fertility rate. That's a mathematical certainty. In order for that to happen, in order for more African people to be in the United States, there would have to be a mass increase in immigration of African people out of Africa into the United States. Of course, that will not happen because of powerful white supremacist ideologues in Congress and in state legislatures, and because of organized police force or violence. I have provided you with my calculations in this short talk, some of them. I provided you with my forecast of the marriage rate, which is a rate that represents the formation of families up through 2050. There are also other underlying economic reasons for our population decline. The abortion rate, for instance, that dates back to the 1970s, is a factor in the population decline of African Americans in the United States. And in the future, I will share my models with you of the data regarding the abortion rate since 1972 or so. Over 22 million African American fetuses were aborted between 1972 or so and today. That's just the number I want to put on your plate. I'm not making a moral argument one way or the other, but there is a price to be paid, and we're seeing it now. We're seeing the debt. We're seeing the moral debt that we are going to have to pay one way or another. But suffice it to say that Black history's greater value, it has a greater value than just remembering what happened in the past. It is also a history that has a futuristic value, which involves constructing models to demonstrate what we should expect in the future given our present conditions. We should take heed because one other titanic overarching problem we face along with everyone else on this earth is the problem of climate change, and there is not enough conversation amongst African Americans about it. And that lack of conversation, that lack of consciousness reflects a growing lack of preparedness. And what is happening in Texas and throughout the Midwest and soon to be over the East Coast is yet another example of extreme forms of weather that we are increasingly going to be experiencing in this nation, and we're going to see African American people unprepared and thus more likely to die first, because more African Americans are poor and without health insurance or without the technology in their homes to protect themselves, including, of course, their children. Extremes of heat and extremes of cold, as well as city and state infrastructures that do not have the capacity to absorb the shock that will be caused by climate change, will be the greatest challenge of our lives in the 21st century. Because I do the science. And the science says that we are in the 6th extinction. And maybe we all need to shake ourselves out of this deep slumber so that some of us will survive. There's a saying that I heard not long ago about hell. And the philosopher said, hell is realizing the truth too late. And I want to leave you with that thought. Hell is realizing the truth too late. I am Dr. Stephen Nur Ahmed. Peace be unto you.